Hey everyone, welcome back to Sunday Girl Eats. I hope you're having a great summer so far. For this month's recipe, we're going to make grilled shrimp tacos with homemade corn tortillas and a homemade tomato jam. Right now I have the shrimp marinating in some different spices, so we're going to go ahead and get started on the corn tortillas. For the corn tortillas, I've measured out 2 cups masa harina. We're gonna add 1 1/4 cup warm water. And we also need a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. Just have some kosher salt here. We're gonna stir this together. And if the mixture seems too dry, we can add more water as needed. You wanna add it in increments of about a tablespoon because you don't want it to be too wet. Okay, so I finished mixing the dough and I actually did it by hand, and I would suggest doing that because it gives you a better idea of the consistency. You don't want it to be too wet, and this definitely seems to be the right texture. It's not really sticky or anything, and everything seems to be well incorporated. So I'm gonna start to divide it into 16 small portions. And I'm just gonna roll these a little bit and then lay them out on my parchment paper that I have set up already. Once this is done, you want to preheat a griddle over medium heat, and we're going to cook the tortillas on the griddle for about 20 seconds on each side. Okay, so I've started to flatten the tortillas by hand. It does help if you use a little bit of the masa harina. If the dough feels a little tacky as you're pressing them into the tortilla rounds. These obviously aren't going to be perfectly shaped since we're doing them by hand. And as I mentioned, I probably will get a tortilla press. I think it'll make this a lot easier to do, and obviously it'll be faster too using the tortilla press. So we'll see how these turn out. And it's nice because you could even serve these as appetizers. I know when I buy corn tortillas at the grocery store, the smaller ones that I get are like the street size tacos. And I do like the smaller ones. I think it's nice because you can get like a good bite with all of your ingredients and your toppings, rather than a really, big messy taco. Okay, so the griddle is hot enough, so we're gonna add the tortillas, and we only need to heat them for about 20 seconds on each side. So I'm gonna lay a couple of these on here. Depending on the type of griddle that you're using, it might take a little bit longer than 20 seconds. I'm just gonna keep checking these before I flip them. And once they're finished, I'll transfer them to a plate to cool off. And then I'm gonna finish cooking the rest of the tortillas before we go ahead and grill the shrimp. So as I mentioned before, I had the shrimp marinating while I was working on the corn tortillas. I had the shrimp in some olive oil, chili powder, cumin, some kosher salt, garlic powder, and onion powder. I didn't measure out the ingredients. You can kind of just eyeball it. Also, if you want your shrimp to be a little bit more spicy, you could add some cayenne pepper. I'm gonna finish grilling these a few minutes on each side until they're thoroughly cooked. And then we'll talk about the tomato jam that I've prepared ahead of time for these shrimp tacos. So we finished grilling the shrimp, and before we assemble our tacos, I wanted to go over the ingredients and the preparation for the homemade tomato jam that we're gonna use. You definitely want to make up the jam ahead of time. It takes about 2 hours to make it, and it's definitely worth making. You need 2 pounds of Roma tomatoes, and you're going to want to quarter the tomatoes and cut them into 1-inch chunks. Remove all the seeds when you're quartering them. You're going to need a 1/2 cup of packed brown sugar, a teaspoon of ground ginger, a teaspoon of kosher salt, a 1/2 teaspoon of ground cumin, a 1/4 teaspoon paprika, and a 1/4 teaspoon of red pepper flakes. You'll also need 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar. You're gonna combine all of that in a heavy bottom skillet or a Dutch oven, and you're gonna bring the mixture to a boil while stirring the tomatoes, and then reduce it to a simmer for about 2 hours. You want the tomatoes and the spices and the sugar that you use to get nice and thick. So if you were to drag the back of a wooden spoon, you know, it would stick to the spoon. You'll notice when the consistency is the right thickness. And, you know, as it's simmering, you're also going to want to make sure that you stir it periodically. Once the mixture is done, you're going to transfer it to canning jars, let it cool completely, cover, and then you can store in the fridge, and it should last for about 2 weeks. The tomato jam is also really good with cheese and crackers. I even used it on a breakfast sandwich that I made this past week. It's a great condiment. You could use it with, you know, meat or chicken, probably even pork, and I think it'll be a great addition to these tacos. In addition to the tomato jam, I have our shrimp. I also have some guacamole, some crumbled queso fresco, and then a slaw that I've topped with like a Southwest dressing. So I'm gonna use all of these for my tacos. If you're having company over, you could set up a little taco bar and let your guests add their own toppings. And if there's other toppings that you prefer on your shrimp tacos, you could also include them as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and assemble my tacos, and then we'll be back. So we finished assembling our tacos. I love how colorful they look and can't wait to try them. Once again, you can use different toppings that you prefer, but I highly recommend making the tomato jam for your tacos. I also recommend making your own corn tortillas like we did. They were really easy to make, and once you get the hang of it, they're not time consuming at all. They're very easy to reheat. You can reheat them on the griddle or in just a pan on the stove with no oil or anything. And then you can also reheat them in the microwave, and they last in the fridge in a sealed plastic container as well. If you end up making this recipe, please share it on Instagram and tag #SundayGirlEats and @SundayGirlEats. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your summer.